Russia portrays itself as mighty, with the manpower, the weapons, and the strategic expertise to bring Ukraine to its knees once and for all. In that version of events, Vladimir Putin emerges as one of Russia's greatest leaders, but that's the illusion Putin wants the world to believe. The truth, according to one of his former closest allies, is far more desperate. Former Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Kasyanov, once a loyal member of Putin's inner circle and now labeled a foreign agent by the Kremlin, claims Putin will be forced to end the war within a year. Kasyanov, who served as Prime Minister from 2000 to 2004 during the first 4 years of Putin's presidency, spoke with Times Radio on July 14th. Initially a holdover from Boris Yeltsin's government, Kasyanov grew disillusioned with Putin's economic direction and left the administration. Since then, he has emerged as one of the strongest and most vocal critics of the Russian president, even attempting a presidential run in 2008 before being barred for political reasons. As a co-founder of the People's Freedom Party and a consistent presence at anti-Kremlin protests, Kasyanov is both deeply familiar with Putin and among the few people the Russian leader reportedly despises. In his interview, Kasyanov made one thing clear: Putin's war in Ukraine cannot last much longer, not if the Russian leader wants to remain in power. Kasyanov believes Putin will be forced to surrender within the year or face the collapse of both his war and his regime. He argues that rising pressure, particularly from the United States, makes continued aggression unsustainable, and central to that pressure is US President Donald Trump.
When asked if Trump might stand up to Putin, Kasyanov pointed to recent developments that suggest he already has. He referenced Trump's mid-July deal with NATO allies, first reported by the New York Times, where Trump announced alongside NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte that NATO would begin buying US weapons and rapidly supplying them to Ukraine. This reinvigorated arms flow, Kasyanov says, is crucial. Instead of just transferring weapons, the deal involves selling them, injecting financial sustainability into the effort and ensuring Ukraine receives the arms it needs to resist Putin's onslaught. Trump expressed personal frustration with Putin's refusal to engage in peace talks, telling reporters, "I'm disappointed in President Putin because I thought we would have had a deal 2 months ago, but it doesn't seem to get there." He added, "My conversations with him are very pleasant, and then missiles go off at night. He fooled Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't fool me." Trump confirmed the deal was fully approved, with American-made weapons soon to be flowing into Ukraine via NATO partners. While specifics remain unclear, Trump promised the deliveries would include really massive numbers of military systems. Kasyanov hopes the bureaucratic process won't delay these shipments, particularly the Patriot air defense systems. For him, the pressure on Putin is both real and effective. Russia is currently committing more than 50,000 troops to its offensive in Sumy and over 110,000 in Donetsk, attempting to capture the city of Pokrovsk. At the same time, it is unleashing record numbers of missiles and drones on Ukrainian cities. Putin is counting on Ukraine not having the advanced defenses necessary to blunt his attacks. But with this new deal, Kasyanov argues, Ukraine may finally have what it needs. If Putin's summer offensive fails, and with Ukrainian defenses bolstered by Western aid, that's increasingly likely, it will be yet another blow in a long string of Russian military embarrassments since the war began. And if the weapons aren't enough, Trump added another layer of pressure. On July 14th, he issued an ultimatum. Putin has 50 days to agree to peace or face secondary sanctions from the United States. Direct US sanctions aren't enough to cripple Russia, given that trade between the two nations was only $3.5 billion in 2024. But Trump's secondary sanctions would target any country that continues doing business with Russia, essentially forcing them to choose between Moscow and Washington. This, Kasyanov explains, could be devastating. Every nation caught in the middle would have to decide whether to suffer US tariffs or sever ties with Russia. Trump is betting they'll choose the latter, worsening Russia's isolation and deepening its economic crisis. Kasyanov also highlighted how existing sanctions have already shaken Russia's economic foundations. Though the early waves of sanctions didn't have an immediate effect, the cumulative impact of more than 24,000 sanctions, over 21,000 of which came after the invasion, has begun to bite. Russian banks, according to Bloomberg, are quietly raising alarms over skyrocketing loan defaults driven by a crushing 20% interest rate. Businesses can't afford to borrow. In the first 2 months of 2025 alone, Russian banks' corporate loan portfolios shrank by over 1.5 trillion rubles, $19 billion. This economic instability is amplified by Putin's shift toward a wartime economy, which prioritizes arms production over civilian goods. While this boosted growth in 2024, Russia posted a GDP increase of 4.1%, the first quarter of 2025 saw that growth shrink to just 1.4%, That's a 0.6% drop in quarterly economic activity. The war economy is proving unsustainable. Russia's industrial output outside of defense is collapsing, weakening exports, and undercutting long-term growth. According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, sanctions have fundamentally altered Russia's economic future. The Kremlin is now locked into a cycle of producing and destroying weapons to maintain the war effort, an unsustainable model. Although Russia managed initial resilience, its economic stamina is fading. Trade with China, Russia's lifeline, fell by 9% in the first half of 2025. Oil revenues have also plunged, with tax income from oil falling 32% year-over-year in May, reaching a two-year low. Even though Russia sold 8% more oil in Q1 2025, revenue from fossil fuels declined by 18%. This financial pressure explains why Putin is doubling down on his summer offensive. He may not be able to afford another one. Kasyanov argues that Putin is pressing hard now, trying to break Ukraine while he still feels financially stable. But that window is closing. Just days after Kasyanov's interview, the EU and UK imposed a new price cap on Russian oil, lowering it from $60 to $47.60 per barrel, with a flexible cap that will always sit 15% below the average market price for Urals crude.
This leaves Putin trapped between two converging forces: Trump's NATO weapons deal and looming secondary sanctions on one side, and worsening economic collapse on the other. And there's still more pressure. Russia is facing a critical manpower shortage. Kasyanov notes that the war economy has pulled workers from civilian industries into defense manufacturing, but there simply aren't enough people. Russia's labor force is shrinking. By 2025, Le Monde Diplomatique reported a labor shortage of 5 million, about 6.8% of the workforce. The causes are a mix of war losses and declining birth rates. Labor Minister Anton Kotyakov recently revealed that by 2030, Russia will need to add nearly 11 million new workers, while over 10 million will retire. Unemployment may sit at a record low of 2.2%, but that's misleading. Thousands of civilian jobs are unfilled because the workers simply don't exist. As Kasyanov explains, civilian industry is already contracting. By year's end, he says, Russia will face a completely different and much bleaker economic reality.
Kasyanov believes that all this pressure will force Putin to sue for peace by the end of 2025. But more pressure may still come. He points to a bill introduced by US Senator Lindsey Graham, which would impose tariffs of at least 500% on any country buying goods or services from Russia. Like Trump's plan, this would target Russia's trading partners, not Russia directly. Graham says this would give Trump a powerful new tool to punish the Kremlin. Whether or not Graham's bill becomes law, its very existence adds to the immense burden already crushing Putin's regime. And there are geopolitical risks too. Times Radio asked Kasyanov if Russia might invade a NATO country should it win in Ukraine. Kasyanov didn't rule it out. He warned that if Putin is allowed to defeat Ukraine, Moldova could be next, followed by a direct test of NATO's Article 5. Only Ukraine standing firm with Western backing can prevent that scenario. A strong Ukraine sends a message that NATO is not to be tested. A Ukraine armed with Western weapons and supported by tough sanctions can convince Putin that aggression against NATO would lead to Russia's ruin.
In the end, Kasyanov paints a picture of a Russian president in crisis. Sanctions are biting, military failure looms, manpower is dwindling, and economic collapse is inevitable. Putin won't sue for peace because he wants to. He'll do it because he'll have no other choice. Russia's looming economic crisis is the core reason it cannot win this war. To understand just how badly Putin's decisions have damaged his own country, watch our full video. And if you found this breakdown helpful, subscribe to the Bawler for more deep dives into Putin's unraveling grip on power. Thanks for watching.